lots of things about birth are so stressful. And so you could, if you already had a background of abuse, you could be seeing it as another form.
We are two women, Jana
and Katy, empowering women to experience new life as Yema mamas.
We are friends sharing our own lives and learning through childbirth,
motherhood,
singleness,
and womanhood to empower you to discover joy and spiritual well-being in all of life.
You are a woman created for wholeness.
Yeah, other areas that are of particular interest to me are when birth is traumatic for the person. And what we have found is that women get PTSD after childbirth, and it's the same PTSD that our veterans had when they come back from war. And that was a very shocking realization, to realize that traumatic birth can cause those same symptoms. And so after a traumatic birth, often the woman has flashbacks, she has panic attacks, she often feels very frightened for her baby, all kinds of things, similar symptoms to being back in war. Well, so I took an interest in this, and I'm trying to think, I think it really came on the heels of learning how sexual abuse in childhood can impact the woman, because I really started working on that back in the 80s, so I think that predates the now seeing it as PTSD. But Phyllis Klaus, my co-author on the book When Survivors Give Birth, she and I spent 12 years writing that book. I can't believe it. But we began to recognize that when people have had abuse in the past, it sometimes gets squelched or even forgotten or repressed. And birth is often pregnancy and birth are often a time when those symptoms come up, or sometimes memories come up for the first time during this vulnerable time. The sexual nature of birth, the exposure, the being, having authority figures telling you what to do, sticking you with needles, with penetration, which is lots of things about birth are so stressful. And so you could, if you already had a background of abuse, you could be seeing it as another form. And so we that was so interesting, because when I started recognizing this, we had 3 or 4 psychologists in the childbirth education movement. And so I thought, well, they'll know. And I asked each one of them, not to name them because I think they would regret it at this point, but they said, oh, no, Penny, no. There's nothing. I know the literature. There's nothing. There was nothing written about this connection. Nothing. And it took an outsider. And Phyllis was not an outsider. She's a psychotherapist. But we put our heads together and realized this is a totally untrodden territory. No one had looked at it at all. And then we've given these workshops, and often people say, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And they start remembering her. I remember her. I wonder if that was what was at work. And when I see the light bulb go off, we're still doing it. We're still revealing this for the first time to an awful lot of people. But anyway, that was a huge eye-opener for me. And everything I learned just seemed to feed it a little bit more, make it make more sense. So I think that is something that it will always be a very important thing to me. And I see it, I always think, and I never label anybody, but if someone has certain symptoms, I wonder if this could be related to earlier abuse. I don't bring it up. As a doula, I would never bring it up. Some doulas are taught to ask about it, and I would say, don't. And I'm going to tell you why, because this is really important. Some of the doula trainers do tell you to put that on your information sheet, and get that. And I sometimes get emails from people all over the country that are doulas. And one doula wrote and said, I asked her about abuse. She said yes. And she said, now what do I do? They don't. You don't just ask about it and then drop the ball. That's what happens to abuse survivors all the time. They're, the hospital intake form, when they're going to a new care provider, there's always something about abuse. And if they I've had so many people said, should I even talk about it? I don't want to open that can of worms. I'm just going to say no. And others will say, well, they wouldn't be asking if it wasn't important, so I'll say yes. And then nobody even follows up on it. And that's just, that's just making it worse. So I don't want doulas doing that. People are not going to doulas because they want someone to help them with their abuse issues during childbirth. They're going because they want assistance during birth. And without ever getting a yes answer, we can be sensitive. We can have it in the back of our head, this is possible, so I'm going to be gentle in this area. If she says she doesn't like vaginal exams, I'm not going to say, oh, they're not so bad. You can tough it out. I'm going to really take it very seriously. And so we don't need to get that yes answer if we're sensitive to the kinds of issues that could come up for an abuse survivor. We're only going to treat her better. We're only going to be kinder if we think that she's dealing with something like that. So that was big passion, still is. And then as we went along, we realized that traumatic birth was often associated with a history of abuse. And so and I've done a lot of writing about this, is how to prevent a traumatic birth from becoming PTSD. Because, some people, it's really horrendous for them. But they don't have the symptoms of PTSD, and others do. They say it was so hard, it was awful, blah, blah, blah. But then they say, well, but look what I got. And they see the positives of it. Or they say, but my partner was so helpful, the doula couldn't have been better, the staff were so kind, it was just a rotten birth. So they can have trauma, but not the symptoms of PTSD. But then some who are carrying an unresolved history, birth, even a fairly normal birth, one that, this is where doulas sometimes make a mistake. Let's say 8-hour labor, vaginal birth, nothing untoward. And they think, gee, that was great. And then they go to see the woman in postpartum and say, oh, that was a great birth. I'm so proud of you. And the woman says, what? No. And then she said, you don't get it. So the doula should always find out, what was this for you?
How did you feel?
Yeah. And then, sometimes when they tell me the story, I'll say, I just want to tell you, do you know what I saw? And I said, sorry, I never kept coming back. You stayed in the game. I was so impressed with you. I'm so sorry you feel the way you did. And after you've heard the story, you say something like that. She said, really? Am I allowed to think well of myself? It's sort of like, we're an expert. Let's use it. Let's pretend we are. But through my eyes, you were fantastic. And that has been very healing for people. And it's just like, and that's where I learned it, the 3 little words story that I told you, the doctor saying, what a trooper. That told me, okay, even though I didn't do it the way he wanted me to, I put everything on him to make me feel good about myself. Horrible, 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 but that's what I needed. And I don't think I'd be here today if that hadn't happened.